Good evening. Tonight, the topic of our little conversation here is going to be the changes which we're anticipating is going to happen or going to be undertaken of the aid from the United States, military aid to the Ukraine once President Trump, or President-elect Trump, is going to be inaugurated on, I think, January 20th or 21st of in January. I think it's the 20th. And besides that, tomorrow is Thanksgiving here. And this week we had, since Monday, quite some news coming out of Europe and here the United States. And let me get this whole thing here somehow started. Today, or 2 weeks ago, the Biden administration announced that they still had $6 billion left of undistributed funds in terms of military aid to the Ukraine from that what Congress had authorized this year. And they said they could fulfill this and they would do this under full steam before President-elect Trump is going to get into office. Actually, it's President Trump, I should say. On January 20th. So today, there were reports coming out that does not look to be feasible. And the reason for this is this money Congress had allocated or basically approved of is not really spent as or given out as money in cash or check or something like this, but rather in the equivalent of military material, mostly ammunition, and then, vehicles, tanks, that sort of stuff, airplanes, and what have you. And now the way this works is that the U.S. military will go into their stockpile, into their storage cabinet, and they're going to look at what they have, and then they release so much of that particular ammunition so we don't get too short of something and we could no longer defend ourselves here in the United States, and that access or what could be, given out is given out. And then that is going to be replenished by the U.S. military. And that's what that money was appropriated for. Basically, for the U.S. military to be able to repurchase the things they gave over, the items they gave over to the Ukraine. Okay, so this is now not going to happen, and it looks like that the dollar equivalent in primarily ammunition, which they're going to get until January 20th, is going to be around $2 to $2.5 billion. So not the $6 billion, but $2.5 billion, because otherwise we would over-deplete our stock items here, and we would no longer be able to defend the United States properly for readiness, combat readiness, and all of that stuff what comes with it. That is now the starting point of this whole thing. So the question is, what is going to happen to the Ukraine, basically? On top of this, I read the Le Figaro, not on a daily basis, probably, through 3 times a week. And the Le Figaro wrote today that the French government, or the lawmaking body, is having a problem getting a budget together in light of the debt the French government has accumulated, like most other governments in the Western world have, which amounts to about 3,200 billion euros. In the United States, we use as the next higher number is trillions. That is then 3.2 trillion euros. So we have 1,000 million is 1 billion, and 1,000 billion is 1 trillion in our accounting system. That is about 1/10 of this what the United States has, but of course we're a much larger country and we have a much higher GDP, even though it's artificially inflated our GDP. I don't even want to get into this. That is sort of a wet accountant's dream, basically, so to speak, of what the American GDP is. It stands for gross domestic product. At one time, it stood for goods produced, basically. When the United States actually built things for the use of of everyday people here, that was included the amount of steel which they produced, pots, pans, knives, forks, plates, toilet paper. I mean, you name it, the whole thing was added up, and that was basically the GDP. Yeah. Goods domestically produced, you could use another word for it, but this was a long time ago. So now it's gross domestic product. And we are measuring, for instance, as gross domestic product, even though there's nothing produced by, is the amount of views, US viewers spend on Google and the ad revenue that creates while you're watching these videos, or Facebook posts and all of this kind of nonsense. Nothing which has anything to do with, reflects any type of real production of anything here anymore. It is just a fictitious number. That's why that is so big to keep this whole thing going. Anyway, so the French are having a problem. And on top of this, so this is the question is, can the French chip in to help the Ukraine then when the United States drops out? That's what we're anticipating. Questionable. I couldn't answer this at this point. And then the BND chairperson, I think his last name is Kahl, Kahl, Mr. Kahl, I forgot his first name, who runs this infamous organization, which is the Bundesnachrichtendienst. There's a whole story behind it on how that thing came about after World War II in West Germany, in the Federal Republic of Germany, when it was divided. And there's some iffy history in this whole thing. And they used to be in Pullach, outside of Munich. That's where they were headquartered. Anyway, this good man, Mr. Kahl, has basically now explained in a press conference today to the German news media of basically what I have been pointing out here for the last year and a half here on my channel, that Russia is basically revamping their industrial military complex. And as I had said, is that probably is going to take another 3, 4, 5 years before this is going to get to a pretty significant size if they keep going like this, which they probably will. That would be my estimation of it, or guesstimate. And he basically said the same thing in the news conference today. But he also then made a point which I hadn't thought about, and that is that he thinks, because he didn't say it exactly that way, but because the United States of basically withdrawing out of this European turmoil situation when Trump is going to be president again, that this would leave the question open if NATO is going to come together under Article 5, the defense clause, where the other countries come to their aid in a case of an attack. And what they're anticipating now at the BND is that the Russia is going to start a small attack somewhere in the Baltic states, where they're going to send some of the soldiers over there, maybe after this Ukraine thing has been stopped for peace, or for not a peace treaty, but at least for a ceasefire for the moment. And the United States is out of the picture, so they would attack only a small thing and then see whether or not NATO is going to call in Article 5 or not. Or they would go into Norway, in a certain area up there close to the North Pole where no one really lives and occupy that territory, say like a few hundred square miles, just as an example. Nothing really of significance. There will no invasion of Central Europe or any of that stuff, just something small. And what they're anticipating is that the European or the NATO would not call on Article 5 because there's going to be countries in NATO which think that this is not going to be large enough to warrant a full-scale war against Russia. But this is basically down the road. They're not there yet in terms of manpower in Russia or in size of their revamped industrial military complex. So this is kind of the further outlook in this, a little bit further of where I have gone here in my channel, as I had kept the focus primarily on the Ukraine. How this is now going to go further with the Ukraine when they're running out of this is what Europe has now started doing, or some European countries, is to actually support the Ukraine in setting up and building their own industrial military complex so they can actually build their own weapons. And that is actually the smartest thing to do, and I had pointed that out too in my videos here in the channel, that this would be the better route to go in this entire scenario. For one is the Ukrainian is more independent as a nation, and they will have to then figure out on how they're going to do the draft system to get more soldiers to fill the ranks on those who have perished or are immobilized or injured in this already. So they have a more manpower out there on the battlefield. That is probably the best thing. The other news this week, and that is a real great concern, was an announcement, by ThyssenKrupp. ThyssenKrupp was or has been the largest steel manufacturer in Germany, especially if it comes to special alloys and special steels, especially for the defense sector. And they said they're gonna reduce their workforce, I believe, in Germany by 11,000 workers until 2030. So for another 5 years, basically, in another 5 years. And that is a indication that, as they are part of the industrial military complex, is that they will not be building or making that steel needed for weapon systems, tanks, or what have you, in Germany, if they're reducing the workforce there. That brings us to the issue of these multinational corporations now, that they're starting to do this in other countries. Now in Germany, the incentive of not doing anything was basically the high energy cost, because of this, what the traffic light coalition, as they call it in Germany, the red, the green, and the yellow parties concocted there in terms of, because of the result of that invasion of the Ukraine with the gas and oil and all of that stuff. So the energy costs have gotten so high, and especially the steel companies, who need a lot of energy to produce that steel, they're going to look very quickly into different areas. And the problem with this is say, Germany wanted to rearm this, and Germany would be drawn into an Article 5 type defense situation, is that ThyssenKrupp could not get that metal, say, like, into Germany in such a case, whether it is made here in the United States or in other countries, because of the restrictions we have in international trade of delivering raw materials or any type of materials for weapons productions when a country is in a conflict, involved in a conflict. We don't use the word war anymore, but conflict. That means that Germany, the companies like Krauss Maffei, could no longer build tanks because they couldn't get the steel they needed for the armament for the steels from ThyssenKrupp because they went somewhere else. in another country. We had this already here now because ThyssenKrupp has a daughter company in Switzerland, and they were making a particular steel in Switzerland, producing it, which was then exported into Germany, and the Swiss authorities would not let that exit Switzerland for Germany because the ultimate destination of this was a weapon for the Ukraine. Just to give you an example, this is how difficult all of this has gotten as a result out of this. Now, I want to elaborate a couple more minutes because this is the reason why Trump is stepping on the brakes. And he said it, I think, a week ago. He wanted to go back to a time of 1894. The United States was doing extremely well at that time. That is all correct, what he said there. And the situation was, this was the time of the railroad barons, the steel barons, the, what barons did we have? The rubber barons, and, you know, all these monopolies which evolved there in the late 19th century. This was stopped around 1910. I forgot what president this was. And America went away from what we used to call capitalism, the classic capitalism, but that was with the ultimate goal of establishing a monopoly, to a free market capitalism or free market system. And it basically meant they broke up these barons. The railroads were, you know, broken up, the rubber companies, and that created competition. And as a result, out of that competition, then the prices came down for the consumer. As more competition there is, as more competition there is, as better it is for the consumer, because eventually there will be a price pressure on these companies to produce cheaper. Global trade, or our globalization, is the ultimate outcome out of that model. But it has benefited the consumer with cheaper and cheaper products. On the other hand, that has put a pressure on the wage sector, where wages have not really grown in proportion to the income of the corporations. That is very much out of balance in Europe and here in the United States, but this is basically it. I don't think Trump is a monopolist, so he would probably not support monopolies, but he will support the free market idea. But it will be a nationalized free market, as it was in 1894, basically, when they started to implement this. This was also done because around 1894, Hawaii was incorporated, so to speak, or taken over into the United States, not as a state yet, but as a protectorate. And the reason for this was the sugar plantations. 4 or 5 different families had set up, American families. The Doles are one of them, I forgot the other ones. And they were producing sugar cane in Hawaii, which was competing with the sugar cane out of the Caribbeans, Jamaica, Bahamas, Puerto Rico, those places. Not Costa Rica. What is the other place down there? Maybe I remember it. The whole Caribbean area was the primary source for sugar into the United States until that point, but they were not part of the United States. Hawaii was, even though the travel distance from Hawaii to the West Coast is 5 times longer than it was or is even today out of the Caribbean down to Florida or into Texas or into Alabama. So they put up a trade barrier by putting taxes or duties on sugarcane from the Caribbean, where there was no duty on sugarcane from Hawaii. And this is the kind of model we're going to get. So the Americans, the 5 American families who were in Hawaii and basically producing sugarcane, had a home run with this because now the cheaper sugar was produced in Hawaii. The interesting thing is this was right at the time before Hawaii became fully taken over or controlled by the United States military, that the Hawaiian king went to the Japanese emperor, I think it was 1880, just a few years before, and they purchased 10,000 Japanese peasants who were supposed to be working in the rice fields. So the Japanese emperor sold 10,000 of his people to the king of Hawaii, who got the money from the 5 families here who were Americans, white Americans. And Dole was one of them, just to have some idea of how this all worked. And then came the occupation, or the takeover, the abolishment of the monarchy in, I forgot this now when that was. It was about the same time, 1894, somewhere there. And then that was it. And they were basically in control, and they had a governor appointed there. And it was basically a military state until Hawaii became a full state in the 1950s. Hawaii was the last state to join the Union, but this is how this led up. And it started with no tariffs, no duties on sugarcane from Hawaii. Today they produce primarily pineapples, where they used to grow the sugarcane, and they produce the pineapple, and interestingly enough, Dole is shipping them, the pineapples, to the Philippines to have them processed and canned, because it is cheaper to ship all of those pineapples from Hawaii to the Philippines and then to the United States than paying someone in Hawaii the wages we pay people here to monitor and run these canning facilities where the pineapples are either processed into slices or into little chunks, and they go into the... Anyway, this is kind of how crazy all of this stuff is. But this is kind of what we can expect, and this is where these duties and taxes and tariffs are going to come in. And this is supposed to be restarting our domestic production of products again for the domestic market here in the United States. This is Trump's idea, and in this process, they're also going to try to put a block or a cap now on the $32 trillion. That is 32,000 billions, in other words, dollars of debt which we have. And the French, they got really, really uptight today, because the 10-year French note today was traded at 3.04%. Our 10-year note now is at 4.3%, so that's another 1.3% higher. This is good for people who are investing money and they need an income based on this. So the higher interest rates usually benefit the smaller investors, or, the people who have we don't have passbook savings anymore, but anyone who has a savings account will benefit from it. So you put your money away in a savings account and you will get interest for it. But Trump wants to go back to the close to 0%, because that is going to save the U.S. government, for one, billions and billions and billions of dollars every year in tax and in interest payments on those $32 trillion. So they have an interest to getting that all the way back down to zero. That will also then delight Wall Street, because a lot of that money then comes then into the stock market, because they can't get any more money out of the government bonds, or government notes. So that the money is going to go to Wall Street, which means that whole thing is going to go balloon even greater. We're at 44,000 now. It could be possible that we're close to 60,000 by the end of Trump's term in terms of the Dow, and the same is going to go for Bitcoin in that direction. It is basically just going to go up. At this point, there's not going to be any more crashes. There are going to be some market corrections, but no real crash, because that money is all going to flow into the stock market and lesser into the bond market and into the cryptocurrencies. That is the direction that is going to go. and most likely into real estate, which means that there's going to be a gigantic real estate boom coming, and it will place even more people out of the ability to buy a home for the first time and that sort of stuff. This is what we can anticipate. The video is now 25 minutes long. I wish every viewer a happy Thanksgiving. And I hope you get turkey. I'm supposed to be having turkey tomorrow. We will see how it's going to go. I saw the turkey already flying to the house today. So I guess it's Turkey Day tomorrow. And with that, you have a blessed evening. And we shall see you when we have more to report.